A common mistake that people make is think, well, this is what I want the media to run as a story. And what you need to do is do a bit of research on the individual journalists or the media outlet. What kind of things are they interested in covering? Is this going to be something that they're going to be interested in? Because if it's not, then they're just not going to look at it either. If you are a charity doing your own media relations and you're very small, kind of maybe thinking, okay, every other month, have we got some kind of news or update that we could put out? Which, could it be an update on, whether we've got a new campaign going on? Have we got something interesting to say? If there aren't hard news stories put out as a release, is there something going on in what's in the news agenda currently? Have we got something to say in response to that? And we could offer ourselves up as a commentator on an issue that's happened, and approach them that way. So there's sort of different tactics that you can use, really.
Thank you, Catherine, for coming on today. So you're a PR expert and working for Strike Communications. So do you want to tell us a little bit about your company?
Yeah, so Strike is a purpose-led comms and PR agency, and we work with charities and social enterprises and CICs, just basically organisations who are doing some kind of social good in the world, and we help them to tell their story and demonstrate their impact and support them.
So that sounds absolutely amazing what you're doing. It sounds like charities really need that as well and definitely need to demonstrate their impact. So what inspired you to sort of work with charities and start up a PR company?
So I've worked in PR for a long time and worked with all sorts of organisations, both in-house and agency side. And I think the thing that I've always been drawn to is I've always said I like to champion the underdog and give a voice to the voiceless. So people or organisations who really need to get their stories out there, who generally don't have the big in-house teams or the big budgets to work with some of the larger agencies that can help them. So I'd worked for a bigger agency, and the clients that I was really drawn to were the ones that struggled to pay the day rate. So I decided that I would set up Strike so that we could try and keep our overheads lower, keep the team smaller, and be able to work with those organisations who are doing really important things.
Yeah, sounds incredible. And we really like the championing the underdogs too, and they always have the best stories. Is there a particular story that you remember from one of your clients?
Yeah, so something we're working on at the moment that, so we're sort of mid-campaign with it. It's a parks campaign, so most people don't think about it. We all recognise how important it is for us to have time out in nature and green spaces, and particularly if you live in an area where you don't have your own green space, people that don't have gardens. It's free space out in parks. We all need to enjoy it. And 1 in 3 people currently struggle to access parks and green spaces because either they have a physical disability or they're caring for somebody with one. Now, and yet that just isn't really widely known, and most of us wouldn't think about it. But so a third of the population across the country pretty much will not go to a park or green space because they just don't have the confidence to know they'd be able to access it or go round it. And it has a detrimental effect on their physical and mental health. So we're working on a campaign with a local grassroots charity. They're a really small charity that has got massive ambitions to make the parks across Bristol and Bath accessible for everyone so that everybody can have that opportunity to go out and benefit in nature. So for me, it's really powerful. I was in a park on Sunday evening, actually, and I saw a family with a teenage boy in a wheelchair, and they were pushing him through. And it completely moved me because there were other people playing ball sports on the grass and doing all sorts, playing volleyball, dancing around. And all they could do with him was just wheel him through, wheel around the edges. So that things like that for me, that's a really powerful one for me. And that image is stuck in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I never really thought about accessibility to parks and stuff. Like, if you are a wheelchair user, like, is there any playground apparatus, for example, for the younger kids? Like, I actually went to Puxton Park recently, and there was a disabled trampoline there. Didn't actually know how it works, but like, I found that fascinating. I would never really thought about it. But I guess what sort of role was the PR playing in terms of helping their sort of mission?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, in that particular one, the role of a PR, I mean, for charities generally, obviously, it's a really crowded landscape, isn't it? Everybody is, every charity is trying to raise awareness of its cause. It's trying to generally fundraise and get people to care about it. And, we've all got our own struggles and cost of living crisis and things that we're dealing with day to day. So to cut through the kind of thing that we do, we're starting with is having a very clear top line. So in the case of that parks campaign, the top line is a third of people cannot access their local park. And that makes you think about it. So it's creating that. So that's what we'll do, is create that really powerful, impactful messaging that will cut through. It's storytelling over a period of time. So what does that mean? It can't just be about asking for money constantly. So it's a bit like what you guys do, showcasing the impact of what they are doing with the money that they've got and the difference it makes, telling the stories in a human way through the people that are either working for the charity or people that are benefiting from it, and bringing all of that together in sort of, a planned activity, which might include some stories for the media, some media relations at key points, social media, which is obviously your day-to-day place,
Yeah, yeah.
and blogs and content for their own channels as well. So it's that whole combination really, because it takes time to get people to build up awareness of what you're doing. So creating sort of sustained activity.
Yeah, perfect. I really like what you said in there about like the catchy headline. Like, I think when you say then like a third of people didn't have access to green spaces, that's immediate like, oh wow, I now take for granted my access to green spaces and stuff. So other than like an impactful headline and like the important messaging, what other things in a PR campaign do you think are like really essential?
It's really important to have credibility, particularly since the pandemic. People talk about authenticity more than ever in comms, being honest. I think, again, another charity that we've been working with recently has been very honest about the fact that they are struggling with rising costs. So they're doing, they're continuing their work. They are doing really well as a charity, but they also have sort of pragmatic reality that we all face that other people will understand. So to hold your hands up and say, yeah, we need to raise more money this year because our costs have gone up like everyone else. So not being afraid to be honest and authentic is really critical, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you said then about credibility, I was thinking like how can a charity make themselves more credible? And I guess what you're saying then about like honest, just being honest and upfront is like obviously one way.
Yeah, and again, it comes back to to showing impact and showing it over a sustained period. We work with a lot of arts and cultural charities as well, and they're a really good example in that it's sort of not enough anymore to, for example, if you're a music charity and you're putting on concerts and performances that different parts of society, different groups, people from different backgrounds will enjoy. That's sort of not enough in its own right now. You've got to go further and demonstrate why that's important and tell people stories about how it has helped them or enriched their lives. So it might be, well, we're also delivering music education and creating opportunities for young people to learn instruments, for
Yeah.
example, and giving them opportunities to maybe look at a career in the music industry, supporting them with education or enterprise advice. So that's the other thing as well with charities, is being really clear about how they are adding value, what it is that they are doing and what difference it is making. And then showing that over a period of time. You need to keep showing that, I think. And that's what gives credibility, and having not just people within the organization talking about it, but the beneficiaries talking about it and people who haven't got skin in the game as well. So we also will do a lot of, it might be bringing in local councillors or MPs or, corporate partners who can also come along and say, yeah, I've seen the work that this organization is doing and I can tell you that it's making a difference. And that also, that external sort of validation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're dead right with that. I think someone said that your story is actually more powerful if it's told by other people, and that absolutely seems true. Like that, I guess that's where case studies come in so handy. You get to hear first-hand experiences from the people who maybe might have struggled with something and how they've gone through that journey, and ultimately got whatever they needed from the charity. Sounds really good. So talking about case studies, then, Catherine, you must have loads of case studies. Can you give us one as a little example?
Yeah, so one that we worked with, it was a couple of years ago now, so it was just as we were coming out of COVID, and particularly the smaller charities that weren't kind of health related or NHS related were really struggling, and so many of the smaller charities, well, maybe the bigger ones as well, are dependent on things like fundraising from things like the London Marathon and all of those kind of standard annual activities where people can go out and raise money for them. And that had all stopped. And this charity, which is Bristol based actually, they're called Nepal Trust Nepal, very small charity, quite niche. They've been going for 30 years and they build schools and classrooms and health facilities in Nepal in the remote communities. And obviously in the pandemic, people just weren't really fundraising for that. And so they needed to raise awareness to kind of build their audiences beyond that sort of niche audience base of people who are really interested in Nepal, demonstrate why we should care about this in the UK, about sort of education facilities in Nepal. And so raise awareness, build followers, and help to support, get more money in, basically. So for them, we created a 12-month campaign, very cost-effective campaign because it had to be done on limited budgets and resources. But so basically, kind of what they do all the time, which is build classrooms and schools in Nepal, particularly in the sort of earthquake hit areas. And we created a campaign which was, we'll build 30 new early years classrooms for preschool kids in 12 months. That's what they wanted to fundraise for. They wanted to raise 50,000. So it was a reasonably modest amount, but for them it was substantial, to build 30 classrooms, which would benefit thousands of preschool kids in Nepal. And we called it the 30 for 30 campaign because it was the 30th anniversary. So it was all pretty simple. And then over the period of the year, we had key activities throughout it that people could join in with, which were, again, very simple. We got a Nepali chef to design a special menu so that people could then download the menu, buy some goodies, so the money went into the charity, and then celebrate Nepali night in at home, and then share their pictures on social media, tagging the charity in. So people could join in with it, have a bit of fun with it, get some money into the charity at the same time, and raise awareness across social media. And then, because what we also had that was really nice was, as we went through the year and as they started getting money coming in, and then they were starting to work on some of the classrooms in Nepal, we were then able to work with the team in Nepal to create photos and video content showing the work on the ground, so you could see the impact of it. And over that 12 months, it sort of made it kind of joined Nepal up, particularly with Bristol, where the charity is based. When there was fundraising activities going on here, we partnered up with the shopping centre, the galleries here, for a week in September, where we sort of took over and did various activities in the shopping centre, gave out free food that was sort of like local cuisine and stuff, and almost created that, almost like a twinning link, if you like, between Nepal and Bristol, so they didn't feel so far away. And kind of, as the year went on, it really built up momentum in a really gradual way. And by the end of it, we actually raised closer to £100,000.
Oh, wow. So doubled the target.
Doubled the target.
Wow, yeah.
We managed to get some really nice kind of supporters of the campaign, some sort of big name ambassadors. Professor Alice Roberts supported the campaign and amplified it to all of her audiences. And they've been able to do the work on all of those classrooms, and and sort of going from strength to strength.
Yeah, that's definitely a very good case study. I love that. I've got a lot of questions. So you were saying at the start, like, it was sort of during a sort of hard period when obviously COVID was happening, and so like maybe the more health services were getting more of the fundraising and more of the money. So how did they know it was the right time to invest in PR at that time? Because I imagine it must be quite hard to invest when maybe there's not so much money coming in?
I think they sort of had to. I mean, they were brave in that, yeah, like you say, sort of investing precious money at a time when things are a bit tight. But I had an old boss once who said to me, when times are tough, the first thing to go is PR and marketing, and then the first thing to come back is PR and marketing. So initially, and we all saw that with COVID, didn't we? I know it's a few years ago now, I don't want to harp on about it, but to start with, everyone kind of looked inwards, didn't they? They kind of stopped the work, and then maybe 6-8 weeks later, once they'd kind of got themselves organized, they started going, oh God, actually we need to get out there. People need to know about us. And that generally is what happens, I think. And that's exactly what this charity did. It had to put that investment in order to get money back out. So we will always create a campaign that is designed to cover its costs. I mean, obviously there are no guarantees. So, but if we're creating what is predominantly a fundraising campaign, then our time should be more than covered by the money that they then bring in through the campaign. And it might be, they wanted to raise £50,000 in 12 months, but what they also wanted to do was get a lot more people signing up to their regular newsletter, following them on their social channels, and generally becoming supporters and followers over a longer period of time. So there's the short-term financial gain, and then the much longer-term one as well.
Absolutely. I think we always sort of talk about the flywheel, which is like as soon as you attract someone, you can then keep them engaged longer and longer, and then you can invest more and then keep engaging more and more people.
Yeah.
Which sounds like it's what's happening there with that. So you've answered that excellently. My next question was about, you said that you did a 12-month campaign. What is actually involved in a PR campaign?
Everyone is different. So it sort of depends. It comes down to lots of things, including what the budget is as much as anything. But generally it's looking, I mean, we think very strategically. It's a combination of strategy and creativity, I think. So we always start from, what are the objectives? What are you trying to achieve? So in the case of that one, they wanted to raise awareness, increase their audiences, and also fundraise. So then kind of looking at who are their key audiences? Who is it that we need to reach to help them achieve their objectives? When you know who those audiences are, you can then create the comms tactics around it. It might be, and generally you'd be looking at a mix of media relations at key points. You can't put stories out to the media every week unless you are a mega sized organization, because people get tired of it. It's not new news. So you might want to have a program of activity where you have stories coming out regularly, but not every 5 minutes. And because that's helpful for that softer awareness. And again, that credibility. If media are writing about you, then there is just the credibility by association. And so it'd be a mix of some media relations, some social media, might look at things like speaking events, or, it might be a business networking event. Is there an opportunity to talk to that audience for 5 minutes? Or we do things like briefings, again, depending on the client and the project. Can you invite the business leaders or the mayor or the local MP along to see something, to show what you've been doing? And then you can get a photo of that moment. They might share it on their channels. So it's that combination of activities and tactics, really. We often talk about in PR, it's getting a bit tacky, but talk about the PESO model, the PESO, which is paid, earned, shared, and owned. And we generally will work across those tactics. So, obviously paid media is paying for advertising and things, which we do less of, but clients obviously do that. Earned is your media coverage. Shared is when people obviously sharing your own content across their channels, and owned are your own channels like your website and LinkedIn and, or your own sort of social media platforms, or your own podcast.
Oh yeah, that's a great way to think about it, actually, because I guess when people think about PR, the first thing they think about is like press relations, like it's only media and stuff. But actually, there's lots of different avenues you can investigate. And we also talking earlier about, like, obviously defining the story and like getting your messaging out there. I guess is that quite a big part in PR as well?
I guess every agency does things differently. For us, we almost, if it's a new client, 9 times out of 10, we will start by creating key messaging for them. Even if they've got really strong messaging, we will look at it and say, let's look at it through a fresh lens, and maybe it just needs tweaking or updating a little so that it's really clear, impactful, punchy messaging that is going to land with the audiences that they want to reach. So, I mean, I quite often base these things on myself. I always say I've got a really short attention span. I often don't go beyond a headline. It's why I started my career in media. So if I'm interested in it, I'll go into the detail, but I need that headline. I need you to explain it to me in 10 words. So we will pretty much always start with making sure that the key messaging or the sort of, is like the elevator pitch. If you went on the radio and you've got 30 seconds to get to get your purpose across, what are those 3-4 key messages that you want the audience to take away? And that's how you have to be able to talk about it. So we will always start with that. We've got, and it's much harder to do than people realize. It can be really difficult to strip it back and say, what are the key things? And it's a really good exercise.
Yeah, I think you're right, because I think if you don't ask anybody what do they do, like what does their charity do, they can go on for ages about all the people they've helped and all that stuff, and it becomes a bit too much for the first time. Like you need to grab the attention first, don't you, straight away? And so I guess, do you think that's more about, is that more about what the charity does, or is it more about how they help people? Like it depend on the
It
charity?
sort of depends. I mean, I think something that's a really good example, and it can be about a particular, it can be for a campaign, or it doesn't necessarily have to be for for the charity as a whole. It might, so a campaign that has kind of stood the test of time. So the RNLI, which consistently has a good reputation, it gets good media coverage. I mean, they are excellent at doing at their public relations. But one of the campaigns that has been talked about for a long time is Float to Live. So I don't know if you are aware of that. So they launched, I mean, it was about 10 years ago, I think, that they brought out Float to Live, which was an awareness piece about if you find yourself out of your depth in water. It's a video that's been watched over 13 million times, I
Wow,
think,
yeah.
now. So it's one of their most successful campaigns, I think. And it's really simple. Float to Live. I have a terrible memory, but I will remember Float to Live. And they wanted to, I mean, it has real impact, doesn't it?
Oh yeah.
But you also associate it with them. So it works on many levels. It's educational. It's really simple to remember, but it also helps with brand awareness as well.
Yeah.
Because you associate it with them. So it sort of supports their fundraising as well. It goes way beyond what the actual campaign was for. But that really simple, whoever came up with that, though, Float to Live, it's just really clear and it cuts through.
Absolutely. I guess you were saying earlier about there's so much noise in the charity world, like how do you cut through it? It's just keep your messaging as simple as possible, and once you've engaged them, then you can sort of push more, I guess.
Yeah, and it's being consistent with it as well. And again, obviously charities often will have new fundraising campaigns each year, and a lot of charities, they have to constantly be looking in different directions, branching out, doing new ways to raise money or demonstrate impact by doing something new and additional, but keeping that real consistency of message, that kind of core message,
Yeah.
is really important.
Let's say then that there's a charity who has really good like messaging. They now know what their key messages are. They've got great case studies and stuff, but they're just struggling to get themselves out there. Like, what sort of things should they be doing to maybe get themselves out in the press more?
If to get into the media, I think media relations is like any other relationship in that it takes time to build up. So we, on many an occasion, will have people get in touch with us, organizations get in touch with us and say, we just want one press release. Could you do us a press release? And we will pretty much always say, there's no point just doing one press release, because if you're not building up a relationship with media and educating the journalists about who you are, what you do, why they should buy into you, unless it is the best story in the world, they are unlikely to run it, because they don't know you and they are bombarded with stories every day. So, and actually, even if they do run the story, even if it is the greatest story that they've had all month, if it's a one-off, then the audience is going to read it and then they're going to forget about it. It's like throwing a pebble into a pond, isn't it? So what you want to do is regularly throw the pebbles in and keep those ripples going. So that is the important thing, is to show up regularly with media, so that but also think about what the media wants. So again, a common mistake that people make is think, well, this is what I want the media to run as a story. And what you need to do is do a bit of research on the individual journalists or the media outlet. What kind of things are they interested in covering? Is this going to be something that they're going to be interested in? Because if it's not, then they're just not going to look at it either. If they can see that you've researched them, you understand the deadlines they work to. If it's online media, they'll need photo or video with it. It needs to be landscape format. They need it by, first thing on a Thursday morning because they go to print on a Friday, or, understanding how they work and fitting in with that as well. So it's looking at those. And then, if you are a charity doing your own media relations and you're very small, kind of maybe thinking, okay, every other month, have we got some kind of news or update that we could put out? Which, could it be an update on, whether we've got a new campaign going on? Have we got something interesting to say? If there aren't hard news stories put out as a release, is there something going on in what's in the news agenda currently? Have we got something to say in response to that? And we could offer ourselves up as a commentator on an issue that's happened, and approach them that way. So there's sort of different tactics that you can use, really.
Yeah, I actually really like what you just said then about sort of seeing what's currently in the news, seeing what's relevant, seeing if your charity is relevant to that, and if your charity is helping perhaps whatever is in the news right now. That's really good. I wanted to ask as well, what do you think actually makes a good story?
Yeah, there's a number of things that make a good story, and they sort of don't change really, whatever the platform. It either needs. We always talk about, is it the first or the last or the biggest or the smallest or the worst, or it's quirky or unusual. It's those are the kind of things that land. It's the so what factor. You have to look at it and go, so what? Because that's what media are looking for. What is going to stand out? So, everybody wants to tell the story of, well, again, talking about charities, every charity is fundraising. And that's not new in its own right. But if it's, we want to raise more money than anyone else, or we've done something different, you always have to look for new angles. What is different in it? And is there somebody, have you got a big name that's talking about it, or a really good human story that goes with it? So if you think about Deborah James, Bowel Babe, who passed away a couple of years ago, if you remember her from, it was very big, particularly on social media. And then sort of her story was very much picked up by media, and really, really sad, obviously, that she passed away. But the charity that was then established off the back of it, the Bowel Babe Fund, which has raised, I think it's raised over 16 million in 2 years now.
Oh wow, yeah.
Yeah, and that worked really well with the media. She worked really well with the media because there were natural. I mean, her story is no different to anybody else's, really, that's going through cancer, but that just, again, it cut through partly because she was so engaging as well. So she cut through as a character, and
Yeah.
she kept showing up, and they had regular points where there were stories to tell, where there were there were points to come out with the media, but also alongside that, she gave very human interviews as well, talked about her own experience, sort of showed what it was like. And that really, that the media really bought into it.
I think this one goes back to what you were saying before about like just being very like transparent and very open and just being honest.
Yeah, that's right. And I think smaller charities, in some ways, it's easier for them than larger charities. In some ways, it's easier for them to get public trust and support because they are generally seen. I think there's the government does this sort of trust index, and I think they did it last year. And so charities come second beneath doctors and above the police for public trust. So it did dip, and obviously some of the very big charities and NGOs have had some not very good sort of global coverage a few years ago, and it's recovered a bit since then in the last couple of years. But smaller charities they have greater credibility and trust because the public buy into the fact that the money, it's really clear where the money is going, whereas the much bigger charities, is the money just disappearing into sort of the administrative costs.
Yeah.
That can also help with media as well, in that if you've got a story to tell, it's very grassroots, it's very, we're small, we're volunteer led, we're delivering that, and it's very straightforward. Whereas if you're sort of Save the Children or Oxfam or something, it can be harder work to demonstrate that same kind of on the ground credibility. However, the other side of that, the flip side, is that the smaller charities don't have the resources for the comms to do it.
No, yeah. I wanted to go back to your case study of the Nepal Trust.
Yeah.
So I guess their fundraising mission kind of quite similar to others. What made theirs stand out, and how were you able to get them good publicity in the papers and so on?
They were really good in that they understood it would take time to raise awareness because, as you say, they're not really doing anything different to anybody else, trying to raise money for something that feels a bit niche. So it was about having time to be able to create those stories. And I think it probably took about 3-4 months before we started getting traction with the media, with the local media, and buying into it. And it's really just looking at what might be an interesting story, because charity raising money to do its job is not news in its own right. But charity raises, I don't know, £10,000 in first month and put the foundations in for a new classroom in Nepal, then suddenly that's slightly more interesting. Or here are the first images of the new classroom being built in Nepal, supported with fundraising efforts in Bristol. Then you can see local media might like that. And so it's sort of looking at those opportunities. Again, where there's not hard news, we also sort of building up, giving the opportunity. So the director of the charity, who has been to Nepal many, many times and is very knowledgeable about it. Most of us probably don't know that much about Nepal. It's a really, really interesting country. And him, sort of offering him up to like Radio Bristol, for example, on their Sunday morning show, where it's a bit more chatty, and talking about his experiences of Nepal, what it's like out there in some of the more rural villages, the work that the charity has done there, the impact of it over the last 30 years. They've been going out there, after the earthquake, they went out to support on a lot of the recovery and rebuilding work. So that's interesting. Everyone's interested in stories and in people's stories and in finding out about other places. So it's just about creating those interesting stories and then pitching them into media that we think that there would be an opportunity where that story would fit naturally. So, and then gradually, as the campaign went on through the 12 months, we halfway through the year, we did this Nepali night in with the chef. So it was everybody create your meals, download the recipe, send your photos in. So then there was a nice story to tell around that, X number of people joining in with this Nepali feast. So there were different sort of points of activity, really, where there was enough to create news stories around it. And because we also reached out to sort of celebrity ambassadors, if you like Professor Alice Roberts. There's a photographer and explorer called Levison Wood, who is well known, who's written various books, who's very, sort of very big on social media as well, and does a lot of traveling. And we knew that he liked Nepal, so he came on board and supported the campaign. So that was another news that we could put out, campaign now being backed by international explorer and photographer and local sort of TV scientist, Professor Alice Roberts. So it's looking at those points along the way and just having the patience and the vision to buy into it, that you can't just manufacture stories out of nothing, but looking at the points along the way and be willing to flex a bit to be able to create the stories.
Yeah, absolutely. I really loved what you just said then. Just kind of help yourself stand out. You can actually just perhaps use the work that you're actually already doing and just document that and show that, and using personal experiences like from the director or the people you're helping possibly, and also reaching out to people who might be able to support your campaign. I'm intrigued of how you would approach that.
Reaching out to them. Yeah, there's maybe somebody else has got a better method than us, but really it's just, if it's, some of them, it will be finding their agent and literally just phoning or emailing and making a bit of a pest of yourself until they respond. Or you might be able to reach out to them on Instagram and get lucky. And so it's exactly the same as when you're engaging with media. You need to understand what they're going to be interested in. And when you contact them, whether it's an email or a call or a DM on Instagram or LinkedIn, you've got to be saying something succinctly that you think is going to interest them. And it may just be that they look at it, you get lucky, they look at it, it cuts through, or it may be that it takes half a dozen goes, or it may be that they say, not interested right now because I'm inundated with stuff. But it's the same thing. You've got to understand the person that you're trying to engage with, whether it's a journalist or a celebrity or somebody who is going to donate to you. What are they interested in? Where are you going to find them? And what's going to resonate, basically. And that's the crux of successful PR campaigns.
So I'm really intrigued then. I imagine there's quite a lot of challenges charities face with PR. What do you think is probably the biggest challenge that they're facing?
I think it depends on the size of charity. So as we said, if you're a small charity, the real challenge is having the resource to be able to invest in the PR and comms that you need to be able to reach your audiences. So it's a real, it's a sort of catch-22. They need the funding in to be able to invest in the comms, and they need the comms to be able to fundraise. So I think that can be really challenging. For the much bigger charities, it's remaining authentic and kind of keeping everyone on track, because you've always got reputational issues to worry about. If it's a bigger organization, is that everyone is accountable, so I think those can be really challenging. But I think across the board with charities or with anyone trying to deal with their public relations, whether you're a charity or not, there are so many, being able to communicate in such a crowded landscape. There are fewer journalists. Media is harder and harder to get traction in. And so many of the media now are very sort of clickbait led, as we know. So that can be, and particularly local media has been really chipped away at. There are far fewer journalists in local media, which makes it really difficult to get your stories out locally, which so many charities are reliant on, particularly the smaller ones. And then social media, there are increasing platforms to work off. The sort of demise or change to Twitter, X, has had an impact on many, because that's such a good platform, or it was such a good platform for getting message out, and particularly engaging with media. So I think that the challenges of being able to reach your audiences, particularly when you've got lean comms resources to do so. And the advice that we would always give is, if you've got lean teams and limited resources, don't try to be everywhere to everyone. Just focus your efforts. So as I say, in terms of media relations, pick the key media, maybe the key half a dozen media that might be local sector, wherever, where you think it's most relevant to you, and ensure that you've got, regular communications with them, and do the same with social media platforms. Pick one or two platforms and do it really well there. Doesn't need to be every day. It might be 3 posts a week on LinkedIn if you're really small. Do those really well. That's much better than sort of scattergun across a bunch of platforms not done so well. But I definitely think it's a real challenge.
Absolutely. I think there's definitely like charities feel like they need to be doing everything that they possibly can to get the messaging out there. But if you do just focus on certain things, your efforts are going to have maximized, hopefully. So that's good advice there. The next question, a bit of a random one. Do you know of any sort of like PR strategies or any PR campaigns that maybe might have backfired?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So it's not one that we worked on, although I'm sure there have been some have gone better than others, but not necessarily backfired. But there's one big charity, which is Bernardo's, which has an interesting approach to it's their marketing side of things, really. But they have always courted controversy, and they are sort of renowned for very upfront campaigns that can be a little bit graphic. They ran a campaign some years ago now, where they had like a baby with a cockroach crawling out of its mouth, and it's about babies not born with silver spoons in their mouths. It was around that, and it's had more complaints than any other of their campaigns. Obviously, it's an ad campaign, but Bernardo's has always chosen to sort of go for those impactful campaigns that get complained about, that are controversial, and there are a lot of mixed views, because generally I think the consensus now is that if you keep showing the horrific images, people disengage with it. It doesn't necessarily translate into donating money. If you show the positive impact, people may be more likely to donate, if we're talking about fundraising. However, for Bernardo's, they've had that strategy for a really long time. So I don't know what their books look like, but it obviously works for them. That sort of the shock tactic.
Yeah.
But I think they've had sort of ads banned before. They've had to change images, where it's. But then you could say, has that backfired? Or if it then translates into media coverage about their campaign, they're still getting that brand awareness. So maybe that's what they're looking for.
I'm sure everyone knows the phrase. There's no such thing as bad publicity.
Well, see, I don't agree with that. There definitely is such thing as bad publicity, but it depends. It depends what you're looking for, really.
It sounds like their shock tactics is very much kind of like going back to when we were talking about the problems. It's sort of like there's so much out there. You need to sort of stand out, and that's how they've decided to do it.
Yeah.
But I like what you said about using the positive impact that the charities had and lead with the impact. Basically, I think it's quite important.
Yeah, and I think particularly in the last few years, where where we've had the Ukraine, we've now got Gaza, the Sudan. We are just bombarded with all of these images all the time, and as alongside becoming desensitized to it, which is terrible in itself, that you have to look away sometimes because it's just too much. And it's like with the climate emergency as well. It can feel too overwhelming. So you think, well, I'm not going. There's no point me looking at that, because I'm powerless to impact any change. So you do need to be able to demonstrate that that every little helps kind of side of it.
You've obviously worked across a lot of campaigns, and I've seen a lot of your work. And one of the ones that I really liked is the Bristol Beacon project. Are you okay just to talk a little bit about that project?
Yeah, definitely one of the favorite things that I've ever worked on, like in my entire career. I think it will really be up there. So probably the absolute highlight with that was working with the team on the name change. So, as you know, being in Bristol, Bristol's history with the transatlantic slave trade, And there's long been debate in the city about places and organisations changing their name to remove association or perceived association with, particularly with Edward Colston, who was the slave trader in Bristol. And Colston Hall had very much been at the heart of that debate for a long time. So we did the name change from Colston Hall to Bristol Beacon after the summer of the Black Lives Matters protests and the Edward Colston statue being pulled into the harbour in Bristol. So we needed to be really careful to make sure that we worked with the community and with community leaders and people for whom that was a really important issue, to ensure that it was received positively and in the right spirit, that it wasn't just seen as, following what had happened, because it had been planned for many years. They'd announced their intention to change the name 3 years earlier, and then the pandemic just got in the way. And the name came from community consultation. They'd sort of engaged with the local community over a couple of years. And so we did the announcement very carefully. A video was created using lots of local people to participate in it. A local poet wrote the poem in which the name was then revealed for the first time. So it felt very much that it was the community. It was the community of Bristol announcing the name and collectively sharing in that decision to change the name, rather than it being an organisation putting that name on the city. And obviously it's a very engaging, unifying name. We live streamed the announcement in 15 countries. We didn't know if we were going to be in lockdown at that time, and we were sort of out, but it was very limited as to how many people you could have in a space. So live streamed it across 15 countries, did interviews as far afield as like the New York Times.
Oh, wow, yeah.
We had media coverage in over 40 countries. And we were trending at number 3 on Twitter that day for Bristol Beacon as well. So and most importantly, it got very, very little backlash. Most people were supportive because we really thought through how we communicated it, how we explained it, and the way we presented it through that sort of community approach. So you still get people who'll say, "Oh, it will always be Colston Hall to me," but it's limited numbers that say that, and it's generally people have been incredibly supportive, and it led to other organisations, not just here but abroad, following suit and saying, actually, we'd really like to know what you did, because we're thinking we're going to do similar.
Yeah, bro. I think that community engagement part is like the key there, isn't it? And I really like the way it was announced with the poet, because it just fits so beautifully with what Bristol Beacon are all about as well.
Yeah, it was absolutely brilliant to do.
So there's some charities out there who are doing like amazing work. Not everyone will agree with the work they're doing. So there's some amazing LGBTQ plus charities, for example, some refugee charities doing some amazing stuff, advocating for people, and they might get some backlash occasionally. What sort of advice do you have for those?
Yeah, and obviously there are high profile names who present very strong views on social media, particularly in that space as well. I think that, there are plenty of charities that sit on a kind of something that is a bit of a lightning rod for it's whether it's LGBTQ or refugee charities, for example. We've seen what's been going on in the last few weeks. I think it sort of comes with the territory of certain charities. I think there are two approaches. The approach that, one is to kind of, some charities will take the approach of being very vocal and outspoken and really fighting back, I guess. And it depends on your particular charity and what I think what feels right for you. I would say my advice is the best thing that you can do is be true to your own organization's values. You can't please everyone all the time. If you're operating in a space where people have strong views on either side, you won't please everyone. So all you can do, and that's the authentic, incredible thing, is what do you believe in as an organization? What do your team believe in? And then you just have to keep living that truth, and you have to accept the fact that not everyone will like it or agree with it. If you're getting lots of backlash on social media, the practical reality is, if you've got a comms person who's having to be confronted by all that negativity and sort of vitriol on social media, you have to make sure you're providing support, because that can be really hard to deal with, and you make sure that you mute or block as many of those sort of trolling accounts as you can. And I think just it's more important than ever that you just keep, I think, calmly re-explaining in that key messaging style again why you're doing what you're doing and why it's important, and sharing your views, but in a non-confrontational way. That's the approach that I would take. But you have to live with the fact that some people are just going to dig down deeper and deeper, and you'll never win them over, and because they don't want to be won over. But taking that calm, measured approach, the people that are sat in the middle that aren't sure, you will gradually bring them along with you.
Yeah, I think that's such good advice. There's always going to be trolls out there, aren't there? But so long as you're sticking true to your mission and your values, you just got to focus on that and use that as your focus.
Yeah. One of the organisations that I absolutely love, and I'd love to work with them, is called Hope Not Hate, who you may have seen recently. They've been around for some years, and they've gradually built up real credibility because they really know what they're talking about. I mean, they're brilliant, and they must work round the clock. But they also, their director has come in for death threats, because they really champion refugees, but they really champion tolerance and inclusivity, and they know that there are going to be people who are gunning for them, but they just show up with their consistent messaging and the evidence behind it as well. They're all they do their research. they have the evidence behind them, and that they just keep going. And I think that they are fantastic, and they live their values, that sort of tolerance, and kindness, and they gradually bring more and more people along with them, but they won't bring everyone.
No, absolutely. I think that's the great thing about advocacy charities. Like, they're so good at just keep telling their messages and their vision and stuff, and bringing people along the journey with them, and hopefully changing people's minds possibly.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming in, Catherine. It's been really nice talking to you. I've learned loads, so thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me.